Good morning. If you could please take your seats. Okay, good morning. I'm Ricky REV. I'm on the faculty here at the law school. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's forum on the REV agenda, the role of residential time-variant pricing. In addition to my faculty position here, I'm the director of the Institute for Policy Integrity, which is proud to co-host this event along with the Environmental Defense Fund and the New York State Department of Public Service. We see time-variant pricing as a critical emerging issue in energy economics, and this forum will give us a chance to explore the subject in depth. Today's impressive row of speakers will discuss the benefits and challenges of this pricing approach and its possible role in energy policy, both here in New York State and elsewhere. In particular, we're very pleased to have Audrey Zibelman and Richard Kaufman with us today. As the chair of the New York State Public Service Commission, Audrey Zibelman helps New York navigate changes to its energy landscape, doing so both adeptly and thoughtfully. She will offer us insights on new changes that could be on the horizon. Thank you. As chairman of Energy and Finance for New York, Richard Kaufman has shown remarkable leadership and vision, which I suppose is appropriate for someone overseeing the Renewing the Energy Vision initiative. I'm sure that everyone here is excited to hear him speak about the future direction of New York energy policy. Is the topic of this conference. We're primarily active at the intersection of energy policy and climate change. I would love to be able to introduce Richard Kaufman, but that honor belongs to Rory Christian, the director of EDF's Clean Energy Program. As I noted earlier, EDF and the New York State Department of Public Service are the co-sponsors of this event with Policy Integrity. Rory focuses on energy and clean air in New York, works with state and city officials, the Public Service Commission, utilities, and private sector clean energy companies on issues of policy development and clean energy financing. Before joining EDF, Rory was the director of energy finance and sustainability for the New York City Housing Authority. So I'm delighted to ask Rory to come to the stage to introduce Richard Kaufman. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming today, and I want to give special thanks to Ricky and NYU for hosting us in this fabulous room. I want to just give them a little round of applause and thanks and appreciation. So again, my name is Rory Christian. I am the Clean Energy Director for EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. The Environmental Defense Fund is a national nonprofit organization that works to address environmental issues through a multidisciplinary approach. That approach looks at the intersection of science, economics, politics, and partnerships with private organizations to address a variety of environmental concerns. And one of those concerns today, we're working through the New York REV proceeding. We feel time-variant pricing is a tool that can be effective in mitigating many of the concerns that we see. In talking through time-variant pricing, I had an opportunity to speak with a number of EDF alumni over the years, one of which was involved in the Wisconsin Power and Light, now Alliant Energy, proceeding in the 70s, where at the time we were talking about time-of-day pricing. And when I asked him, what kind of reception did you receive? How was it viewed? he could not give me a single kind word. It was viewed with hostility. It was viewed very negatively. And by the turnout I'm seeing today, I can say that there's a great deal of interest in this room, and it's grown in the 40 years since that proceeding has taken place. And the New York State has set an excellent platform from which we can have this conversation, engage in it, and identify effective solutions for both consumers and the environment and utilities alike. And so it's that I've been given the honor of introducing a man that needs no introduction. As you all know, this gentleman is the energy czar of New York State. He manages the New York Power Authority, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and several other organizations. And because I could probably read off a list as long as my arm, I'll keep it short and go straight to the point. I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Kaufman.
Thanks, Rory, and thank you, EDF, and thank you, NYU, for hosting this event, and thank you all for being here because this is a very important topic. So the Governor Cuomo called me right after Sandy. He said that the utility industry was in the vinyl age, in the age of the iPod, and so my mandate was to try to change things. And that's what we've been trying to do in the last 2 years, is to have a fundamental reshaping of policies in the state. And that's everything from the restructuring of LIPA to what we're doing with grants at NYSERDA, the creation of the Green Bank at the New York Power Authority, programs such as K through Solar, the New York Community Grid Prize, and regulatory changes, all of which we brand as REV. And so what's the objective of REV? The objective of REV is to build a networked hybrid system that gives customers more choice, a system which is more valuable and cleaner. So, as you all know, we've now made clear what we expect utilities to do under the Track 1 order. They will manage and need to invest in a network that's going to do several things. We want utilities to optimize capacity utilization. Capacity utilization in the state is about 55%, and for those keeping score on Long Island, it's 44%. We want utilities to shape load, to integrate DER where it makes sense, to procure clean energy resources, that will do things to help create a retail marketplace. We further said that third parties will own DER. This will not be put in the rate base for regulated utilities with certain exceptions. And so from a policy standpoint, why did we think that was the right answer? Why is it that we don't think that the regulated business should own DER? Well, there are two reasons. One is that distributed solutions aren't necessarily a natural monopoly, because the whole point of a monopoly is when the collective is cheaper than the individual, and distributed solutions are getting to a point where the individual may be cheaper than the collective. But the second reason, and this may be even more important, is DER can not only help reduce customer bills and help the system as a whole, but the key thing about DER resources is they're located by the customer. Customer-sited energy technology provides an opportunity to rethink and get more value out of the electricity system. And it really takes us back to the time of Edison, because Edison and others at the time thought electricity system was going to be about lighting, and obviously electricity turned out to be much more than lighting in terms of the value that we've gotten out of the electricity system. And so we may be at exactly that same moment again today. So consider time variant pricing, and consider it in the context of what third parties may offer to customers. Maybe there's a third party that wants to offer new appliances as a service, or they want to offer entertainment services, or electric vehicle transportation, or even home health care. Time-variant pricing could help customers monetize the value, or there could be more value to the third-party service provider for offering these services. But the customer motivation isn't going to be about saving money or saving the planet. It's going to be about entertainment, health, convenience, things that we use the electricity system for, but we would get more value out of the electricity system. So it is these innovations that's going to come from competition, to figure out what the technology potential is for distributed solutions that's going to help us figure out what customers want. And that's why we need to have more competition around customers. And that's why DER markets need to be competitive. So this takes us now to the hard part of where we are, because we're asking utilities to change their business model. And this is a major cultural change. Utilities have earned profits by committing capital. Growth is growth in capital deployment. And now we're telling utilities that we want them to be more capital efficient. We've said we want utilities to integrate DER. But this hasn't been a business for utilities either. It's been a compliance matter. We've said that we want utilities to procure DR, energy efficiency. This hasn't been a business either for utilities. It's also been a matter of compliance. We're telling utilities that, sure, that they absolutely need to have customer relationships. We're not saying they shouldn't have customer relationships, but we're saying that we don't want them to try to own the customers. And we want utilities to do things to promote competitors, to view third parties not as attackers, but as customers and partners. We want utilities to do things that are more open architecture, from procurement to data. We want utilities to think about earning fees, not just getting economic returns from committed capital. And the key thing about earning fees is that that's a way utilities can earn something from human capital. And today, utilities, unfortunately, unlike many other leading businesses, don't have the opportunity to earn profit on human capital. So these are big cultural changes. But third parties also need to change, because it can't just be about their own solution. It can't just be about solar. It can't just be about batteries. It can't just be about fuel cells. It has to be about the solution. And these third parties need to think about the whole envelope of the bill to help fund their solution, not just relying upon grants and subsidies. Just in the same way that utilities need to view third parties as customers and partners, third parties need to view utilities not as the slow-moving beast to be attacked, but also as customers and partners. And third parties can't just be in the business of behind-the-meter solutions where it's good for one customer, but over time represents a meaningful cost shift to everybody else. And third parties also need to recognize that location matters, that the benefits of distributed resources vary around the system. It requires also cultural change, what we're doing in government. So we need to move government funding away from funding specific projects sprinkled across the state. And government people feel really good when we fund specific projects because we can point to specific projects and say we've done a good job. When we fund something tangible, because we need to, in order to get scale, we need to migrate our support to areas where the state can actually make a difference, for example, in reducing soft costs, such as customer acquisition. And the funding there are things like standards or community aggregation. These aren't specific projects, so it's a different business for us. And it means the government needs to be very close to the market, and the market is always going to be shifting to intervene, as it were, one standard deviation away from where markets are today, because that's where we're going to get the maximum leverage. We don't want to get in the way of the market. We want to stimulate markets. Also means that regulators need to change. We need to get used to more rapidly changing markets and move away from static ideas, and I know that I can speak openly here, because things like benefit cost analyses is not really as market-oriented as it maybe ought to be, to using market dynamics and system planning. And you could imagine over time moving towards a stochastic integrated resource planning as opposed to deterministic resource planning. Environmental groups, I'm not saying all environmental groups, but some environmental groups also need to change because this requires a change in culture too. We're going to have an RPS and we're going to have goals that everybody can point to, but the approach that we're taking is a market-based approach. We cannot make progress as fast and as far as we need to do under what we had been doing in terms of imposing charges on customers to support energy efficiency and renewable energy when we already have a system which is capital and energy inefficient. And arguably, our policies were also inefficient. We simply have not been able to achieve fundamental change or scale under our current approach. And that's why we're trying to change everything. Which takes me back finally to just today's important discussion. So time-variant pricing is not new. And so in today's discussion, please consider time-variant pricing in the context of REV. So first, as is clear, we're aiming for systemic change. And we want to move away from pilots to deployment. There have been plenty of tests of technology. There have been plenty of pilots. It's time to now deploy. If we are aiming for systemic change, we need to look at the whole, including the cultural changes that I talked about in the system, because that's how we implement things, is by looking at things as a whole and looking at some of the cultural issues. So we can't think about time-variant pricing in isolation. So in your discussions, please integrate it into the whole, into the technology that's going to permit it, how it's going to be paid for, how utilities should be paid, what's the role of third parties, data, and retail market deployment, including customers and how customers feel about that. And this last point, customers should be first. Because we can change the rules and utility incentives, but ultimately REV will succeed or fail on the degree to which more value is delivered to customers through customer engagement. So the trend in the last, 3 decades or more in business around the world has been re-engineering companies from a production push to customer pull models. To start with the customer and re-engineer the business backwards to production. We need to do that in the electricity sector, but it's really hard because there are lots of parties that are involved. It's not just a single company in an industry. There are many, many stakeholders. And so it's going to involve meaningful change and meaningful cultural change. So the time to do all this is really now. We owe it to the people in New York, and let's show how a market-based approach can work. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Richard, for your comments and leading us off today. Before I begin, I'm Audrey Zippelman, for those of you who don't know who I am. And I wanted to express my appreciation to NYU as well as EDF of working with us to help host this event. And do you guys hear me? All right. Sort of, I'm not as tall as Richard. I'm working on it, but I'm not as tall as Richard. So what I'd like to do today, because I think Richard's done a great job of talking about the broad scope of REV, and really drill into, as we begin the discussion, and the really important question of where do we go with pricing? As Richard said, you know, when we started off with this whole concept in REV, and when we began, you know, my first conversations with Richard was I was coming on board in administration, was Richard's comments is that we need to turn everything around. And we need to stop thinking about the world from the generator in, but from the customer out. And we really need to think about it in terms of bill management, not just buying energy. Because when you think about any other commodity one buys, and in terms of markets, it's really around your choice as a consumer. You pretty much decide what do you want to buy, what quality do you want to buy, and you know the price differentiation of your choices. And you may decide, as we often do, particularly when it comes to communications, that we're willing to spend actually more than we've done historically because we look at different values that we get from the devices we buy, the different conveniences we get from the prices we buy, the attributes that we want to have. And so when you think about electricity, in really thinking about what we're trying to change in REV, is really trying to think about how are we trying to affect the consumer experience. And in doing so, I think, you know, there's a couple things that there are always lessons to be learned, one of which is a lesson really we learned from the wholesale market. As Richard talked about, one of the greatest challenges we have in the electric industry is the underutilization of capital. We have invested huge amounts of sums of dollars in distribution, transmission, and generation resources to deal with the fact that electricity utilization rates is highly inefficient. We only use the resources less than 60% a year on average, and there's some resources we only use 10 hours a year. And yet we have to pay for them because electricity, like no other commodity, really can't be readily stored. So we can't have big towers of electricity sitting outside of communities waiting for that day, that moment when everyone flushes their toilets at the same time. We just don't get that. So we have to build generators, transmission, and distribution. So the question is, how do we as consumers become more efficient users of electricity? Well, one of the things we've learned in the electric market, the wholesale market, is that when we moved away from average pricing of the commodity to real-time bid pricing, what we call locational marginal pricing, where we actually show the value at a particular location of that next kilowatt, we drove efficiency throughout the wholesale sector. We made the transmission more efficient, we made the generators more efficient, because we revealed the prices of the commodity. And therefore, the folks who were responsible for maintaining those units and dispatching their system were able to say, well, wait a minute. Rather than dispatching this local generator, we can dispatch that generator over there, which is a lot more cost effective, because now we know what the congestion rate is on the system, we know how to deliver it, and it makes the whole price more efficient. And we saw that in the wholesale markets once they developed, that we drove the capacity factors of generators up, we drove the utilization rate of transmission up, and that had the beneficial effect of driving prices down for consumers. So now when we think this about REV, it's, well, how do we take this same learning, that revealing prices, which is true in any market, and get it to the consumer level? Because if consumers had better understanding of what the prices were, then they could make more informed decisions around helping them manage their bill. And so the conversation today is really thinking about how do we develop markets and how do we provide that price disclosure in a way that allows consumers a much better decision-making tool about the choices they want to make, but does it in a way that also addresses some of the societal issues that we're all concerned about. And so, for example, one of the issues that frequently comes up, and I know you're going to be talking about it today, is that having real-time pricing sounds great if you're in a position to manage your price. But if you don't have any tools, if you can't afford the better refrigerator, if you can't afford, and you're in a situation you can't put solar on your rooftop because you don't own the roof, you're a renter, then getting a real-time price is just like, oh, great. Now I know my price is going up, but I can't do anything to manage it. So part of REV is not necessarily just saying we're going to mandate real-time pricing. Rather, we want to provide opportunities for people to see it. But more importantly, we want to provide the right price signals to provide the tools so people can manage the prices and we can get the signals out there. So some of the things that we need to be thinking about in that context is, one, in New York today, legally, we do have voluntary time of use pricing for those who want it. It's not mandatory. And at the large commercial level, they do get voluntary time of use pricing. The issue is what do we do with the residential and small commercial markets? Should we get it there? The second question is do you really need real-time pricing in a way that everyone sees the critical peak pricing, or do you need the real-time price information so that third-party aggregators can indicate what is the value of time-shifting usage? And then therefore we have markets, which we're calling demand response markets, where the value of time shifting your usage is not necessarily a price to the consumer, but a credit in a demand response. So in other words, think about it this way. Electricity is like no other product. Using it and selling, you use it and you produce it simultaneously. One of the things we know is that the price of electricity goes up, the more you have, the higher the demand. We also know that in our distribution grids, sometimes the price is not the highest in the commodity price, it's just that you have higher utilization rates. So I know you'll hear from Con Ed, there are areas in Con Ed's network where they peak at 10 p.m. at night. That's not when the system peaks, it's just when their network peaks. And that's when everyone's home, putting on their air conditioners, watching their TVs, on their computers, and all those other things. So the issue is, well, what if Con Ed had a program that said if you manage your prices from 10 p.m. to midnight, and you're willing to allow us to control the thermostat, or you have an aggregator who kind of allows you to control the thermostat so the temperature inside is not a really comfortable 70, but maybe a 72. And Con Ed says, I'll give you a credit for that if you allow me to do it and I can circulate that on and off. Would that be something that people would say is of value? And if in fact it turns around and your supplier of electricity says to you, there's this great program that Con Ed offers. And if you allow us to circulate your thermostat maybe for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you allow us to put a delay switch on your washing machine and on your dishwasher, and allow us to do this, we can manage your price of electricity. So rather than charging you, I'm going to make up a price because $50 a month, we'll charge you $40 a month. If you just allow us, and you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is say, yes, I want to be green, I want a cheaper price for electricity, and we'll enroll you in this program and we'll manage it for you. Would that be something that people would say, hey, yeah, that's good for me. I don't really care, 71, 72, I can't really tell the difference anyway. I'm okay with that. So that's the kind of stuff we want to think about. It doesn't have to be the flavor of every other state. But what it is how do we get the information in the hands of the consumers so that they understand the value of the choices they're making, and that therefore that value is translated into a more efficient system that drives both the efficiency at the local level and at the wholesale level. So our discussions around time of use and variant pricing is based on a pretty sound principle. When we did regulated cost of service rate making, we adopted the view of average cost pricing. And the reason you do that, it's everything in rate making is a way of essentially socializing different benefits and costs. And so average cost pricing is a good thing from a consumer standpoint because the mass market tends to be more efficient users of electricity than industrial use. And so when everyone just gets a flat price, you get the benefit of the fact that even though you may use electricity inefficiently, you're having a fixed flat price, and so your size of the cost is lower. Now that we're moving to more of a market mechanism, what we really want to do is send price signals out there so that people can understand the impact of their choices and do that in such a way that it makes it, frankly, we internalize the complexity for consumers. So it's not that we're exposing them to real-time prices, but give them the benefit of getting involved in programs where if they can manage their prices better, they get a real economic value, and that then drives behavior. But it also allows third parties to come in and offer value around energy efficiency, around time of use pricing, that today average cost pricing doesn't. So it's certainly a complex issue. It's certainly one that raises a lot of emotion in the regulatory field. We need to think about things like how do we protect low-income consumers? How do we protect fixed-income consumers? How do we make sure that the true value gets to consumers and it also gets back to how we manage the grid? But it's clearly a discussion that needs to happen because what we know fundamentally from markets is that unless there's real-time information, unless there's price disclosure, you're not going to change behavior. If all we see is the same price all year long, all day long, we really don't know where in fact we're impacting the system. So first of all, I appreciate the dialogue. As Richard said, that this is for us, the whole process of REV is a journey. We've laid the table. I think we've put really nice silverware and plates on it, and it's a really nice table, but now we need to start to this next level of serving I'm going to stop this analogy because it's really bad. But anyway, we need to get to that next level of complexity, really start digging into the next level of issues. So, and this is certainly a critical one for us. I have now, since I think it's time, the opportunity to introduce the next speakers. And I'm looking at this, I think, Eleanor, you're going to be joining us and moderating, but are we beginning with Ahmed? I'm looking at the agenda. Okay, so Ahmed Farkley is our guest speaker, and he's there. Hi, Ahmed. And Ahmed is a principal with the Brattle Group and is a leader in the fields of smart grid strategies, the economics of energy consumption, innovative rate design, and the cost-benefit analysis of smart grid technologies, including advanced metering, storage, and electric vehicles. He has advised over 100 utilities, regulatory commissions, and system operators throughout the U.S. and internationally. Dr. Farkley is a prominent figure in the analysis of time-variant pricing programs and has appeared before legislators in numerous states to testify on these issues and others. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Karachi and his master and doctoral degrees from UC Davis. So first of all, thank you. And I can tell you that Dr. Farkley and Brattle Group has been instrumental in the debate around why we need to move to time-variant pricing across the United States in terms of how do we really promote efficiency. I think we're very fortunate to have him here with us today as we begin this discussion and really our inquiry into how to make this better in New York. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. One major mystery has been resolved. I was sitting there and wondering how will I see my own presentation because I saw those two screens over there, and I thought, gee, I haven't gotten it memorized, so I brought my computer just in case. But I see a screen right here in front of me, so I'm saved. Thank you. I don't carry hard copies anymore. I just need something to move. Just hit this.
Yep.
Okay,
But we
so
have to get you to the right presentation.
Right, yeah.
Which is your presentation? Which one?
It's the one at the bottom.
This one?
No,
Oh, this
further
one.
down. Yeah. So now I can see it, and you can see it as well. First of all, let me remind you that there are index cards that were handed out in the very beginning. If you don't have them, maybe raise your hand, because the way they're going to do the questions and answers is the cards will be passed around, and please jot down your questions as you listen to my remarks, such as they might be. And then they will be collected, and the moderator will then going to read out the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. So that's sort of a logistical clarification. Well, thank you again for inviting me to come here. It is really an honor to speak to this group here at this very ornate hall. I'm really overpowered by the portraits that are looking at us. I suspect that some of them are more serious about time-varying prices than we are. I saw one in the very back who's sitting on his desk looking at us, so very relaxed. And if you've had a chance to check out the men's room, I can tell you that it is a feeling that evokes ancient Rome. All right, so let's begin with a remark that Winston Churchill made at the height of the Second World War. It's a line that has stayed with me, not that I was around when he made it. The remark is, the future, though imminent, is obscure. And that is so true, particularly when it comes to electricity pricing or REV or anything that has to do with energy. We have a sense of where the future is, but it's a big cloud. And as far as my career goes, for the last 35 years, I've been talking about the future and living through the present, seeing that the future is always a bridge too far away. But I get the sense from this group that we might just be ready for the future after all these years of waiting. Time of use pricing has been around for a while. It does evoke strong emotions. A person even said to me, a commissioner from another state that I will not name, he said, if you keep talking about this, my wife will divorce me. And I said, my goodness, she's going to divorce you anyway. Why blame it on the pricing of electricity? As we look at the future, we see several forces that are visible today that are going to shape the future. The first is what I'm calling a new generation of consumers that I'm going to call organic consumers, and I will define them shortly. Some of them are in the room, I know. Second is continued innovation in digital technologies. It doesn't stop with the Nest thermostat, but imagine the world as it was before Nest came along. Hardly anybody imagined that something like the thermostat could be so exciting. And now you see it everywhere. People are talking it up. Total revolutionary change. Smartphones, people are selling smart thermostats with wireless in them. And I even asked the director of Smart Grid at Honeywell, what's the value of having wireless in your smart thermostat? He said, we don't know, but maybe the person doesn't want to get up when they're watching TV and adjust it. They just use their smartphone to do it. I said, are you promoting laziness? Is that what this is all about? He said, well, it could be that the person went to Hawaii and forgot to adjust their thermostat and realized when they were basking on the beach there. I said, how many vacations do you take a year? I'd like that job too. He said, really, we don't know. What's happened is people want the smartphone. They want to rule their life with the smartphone. And that's what you're seeing is all these digital technologies coming out. Even if you don't want them, and even if you don't know you need them, you'll be amazed how many people right now in this room are looking at their smartphones. Then we have distributed energy resources. Of course, that's the huge opportunity that we have. That's what REV is all about. And by the way, congratulations to New York. REV is now being mentioned in Australia, where I was last there in Melbourne. They were talking about REV. In Hawaii, they're talking about it. I haven't been fortunate to go there just yet, but it has become global. That's the internet for you. So there's a lot of excitement. It also comes with challenges of cross-subsidization of customers and all of those things that you're very well aware of. And then, of course, there are smart meters. And people keep telling me we don't have smart meters in New York, and we'll come back to that. By the way, former chair of the New York Commission, I was very encouraged to hear the remarks from the current chair about the need to focus on customers, because that's where all the action begins. A former chair once told me that he wants it to begin from generation, and he wants to go to transmission, and then to distribution, and then maybe to meters. And I said, what about the customer? His response was, I want that to start in California, and then I want it to go west from there. That sums it up. So we have a big change, guys. Okay, rate design has been stagnating for a century. It's about to undergo revolutionary change. And that's not just my opinion, but I believe you will see it in much of what I present today, coming from other people. So there is a revolution that's coming in rate design. And we've had flat rate pricing for years. People don't know what it is, so I created an acronym, FRP, to make it more transparent. So FRP has persisted because of two reasons. The first is the lack of advanced metering, but that's just a ruse. That's what I was told in 1979 when I started my career in the rate design study at EPRI. The smart meters are a barrier to time of use pricing. That sounded to me like Archie Bunker was talking, but that's what the reality has been. Do people know or remember Archie Bunker? Probably some do and most don't. It was a character in a TV series that was a big hit. He epitomized the past. At least that's how it came across to me when I was 27 years old. What's amazing is that thinking is still there. It's the lack of meters. So you put the meters in. Now we have 50 million meters in the US that are smart. And we have 2 million prices that are smart. What about the other 48? Okay, that's the big question. We'll come back to that. The second issue is the big issue, that customers won't understand it, either time-varying prices or demand charges. And I'll come back to that issue as well, about sort of having a very dim view of our customers. We're all customers. Every person I know in the United States, in the globe, is a customer of electricity. Okay? And they buy all kinds of products with time-varying pricing, and I'll get to the examples later on. When it comes to electricity, we lower their IQ so it touches zero. Okay. The industry as a whole, and I will not get into whether it's the utilities or it's the energy service providers or third parties. We can get into that conversation as the day progresses. But basically, the industry broadly defined has begun moving to smart pricing, a three-part rate comprised of a monthly service charge, a demand charge, and time-varying pricing. That is the optimal combination. We have had that in our commercial and industrial market for a century. And it has not been an accident. We have had it because there's a long, storied academic tradition supporting it, going back to Hopkinson and Wright in the late 19th century. We do not do it for residential customers because we're trying to protect them from what? From low prices. So we want to give them high, flat prices. Very smart. So who are the organic consumers? Very, very briefly. You know some of them, you are some of them yourself. You have friends and neighbors. This is the new generation that's coming. They're passionate about saving energy. They're prepared to change their lifestyle. Remember the person who said, conservation is a personal virtue? Do I need to remind you of the name? Okay. For these people, it is the way they live their lives. When I was young in my career, they said, don't talk about changing lifestyles of customers. We're going to have efficiency and not conservation. Well, that has changed in these 35 years. Now people want to conserve, not just to lower their bill, but because they feel good about it. They want to leave a better legacy to their children and grandchildren. It's about clean air. It's about a better planet. It's about all of those things that you know very well. It's not an issue of Democrats versus Republicans. That's just the way the new generation is. I've seen it even in the South and in the Midwest. Unlike prior generations, they're using smart consumer electronics to live the efficiency lifestyle and are willing to change their lifestyle. I don't like LEDs. I'm talking about myself. I don't like CFLs. I don't like the color. So my daughters tell me, Dad, you better get used to it. That's just the way efficiency is. Okay? It's good to be reminded by your children about where they're going, where their thinking is. I didn't like the shape of the Prius when it came out. I was told that's the shape of the future. Okay? So to the new generation and the generations to come, efficiency is important. And these folks, many college graduates, many now further in their careers, they have a curiosity about new technologies. There's no technophobia. Again, Archie Bunker, that thinking is gone. And so some of them are also producers of electricity. The term prosumers, which came up in Silicon Valley, is now being applied to them. They're both producers and consumers. And so that is what I mean by the organic consumer generation. And then there is that term, the house of the future. That's been around for a very long time, right? And it was always in the future, like the factory of the future. You could never touch it. It was tantalizing. Okay? Well, I believe it is about to enter the present. I mentioned Nest. All the appliances that you're buying now, whether you want to or not, are going to be smart appliances with chips in them, because it costs almost nothing to put them in. They're not going to make certain appliances without the chips just because you think there is a cybersecurity threat or there are health effects or your bill is going to double. All of the concerns that were there about smart meters not too long ago. You might remember the Bakersfield problem in California when people thought their bills doubled because the meters were smart. When that issue was resolved, they said, we're going to have health effects, we'll get cancer. And then came the cybersecurity issue. They just kept coming. They were like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse when the smart meters were put out there. Okay? So what we have is we are beyond that stage, and we are now ready for the smart houses. Whether or not we want them, they're coming. Okay? And the new generation wants them. So what you could see is automation with prices. Okay? This was a dream put out by Fred Schweppe, a professor at MIT a long time ago, professor of electrical engineering. And so obviously, being the electrical engineer that he was, he called it homeostatic control. Don't you love that term? Well, others call it real-time pricing. That's technology-enabled. So prices rise, consumption falls. Prices fall, consumption rises. You automate everything. You say that you're prepared. As Audrey said, maybe instead of 70 degrees, it'll be 71 or 72. And Oklahoma Gas and Electric is the success story, and I'll talk about them at some point. Unfortunately, because of logistical snafus, they are not on the program, but I had the pleasure of being there last week. And as I was flying into Oklahoma City, I was sitting next to a person from Oklahoma who was so excited that I was going to be there, going there for the first time, that he felt necessary to give me a quick history of Oklahoma, how it was the Indian Territory and then how it became a state and all of those good things. And I really appreciated not being able to do some work for a change and catch up on my geography and history. It was fascinating. I'd heard so much about Oklahoma. And he confirmed everything I had heard, and I will not go into that. But what I will tell you is that at the end, as we were getting up, I thought I'd ask him an energy question, allowed to be nerd for a minute, right, on a 3-hour flight. So I said, by the way, are you familiar with Oklahoma Gas and Electric's electricity pricing program? He said, where the prices fluctuate hourly? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, they call it smart hours, and he started to give me all the details I didn't want. Okay? I said, this is brilliant, okay? Then I took a cab. The cab driver had double majors in history. And he told me, again, a lot about Andrew Jackson, the president, who apparently didn't like. And then at the end, I asked him, I said, do you know anything about the Smart Hours program? He said, yeah, everybody here talks about it. I said, are you pulling my leg? Do you know I'm in this business? He said, I didn't know you were in that business. Why would you be in that business? You look like a smart person. Well, then when I finally went the next day to Oklahoma Gas and Electric and I saw the building, you won't believe this, I was stunned, not at the architecture, not at the number of stories it had, but at the 3 murals that adorn the exterior. No Mona Lisa there, smart hours. One of them talked about what smart hours are, another one talked about how you respond to them, the third one said how much you would save. I mean, that is how you do it. And as a result of their very successful program, They have signed up 20% of their customers, opt in on variable peak pricing. I'll talk a bit more about them. They have automated the response by giving a smart thermostat, and they don't control the thermostat, the customer sets it to their comfort level. Now, they are fully regulated. They're not restructured in Oklahoma. They're doing it because they want to avoid building a 600 megawatt coal plant, and they want to get about 200 megawatts offset through the smart pricing program. As the saying goes, and I know it's a cliche, it's a terrible cliche, but I have to use it. Sometimes cliches just have to be used. Where there is a will, there's a way. When the chair of the commission says, I want to start with generation, go to transmission, go to distribution, and then I wanted to begin in California and go to the west from there, you know there is no will. I reminded him that you're sitting in the shoes of Fred Kahn, who is one of the leading lights of time of use pricing. The problem is it has gotten a bad reputation. Nobody wants to do it for that reason. But look at Oklahoma, they have done it. And you will hear today case studies in the next session, I believe, from SMUD, from Baltimore Gas and Electric, and from Illinois, that will show you it works. It's a new generation. The old generation will not accept it. I've been in debates with Barbara Alexander numerous times. She's well known, and I respect her a lot. We talk about vacations and little else, because we have not much in common when it comes to time of use pricing. She will remind you in Maine it failed because they mandated it. And there are countless stories of why it failed. But just because it failed doesn't mean we should stop doing it. The main reason we do it is to give consumers choices. And the other reason we give it, again, was mentioned by the previous speakers, the capacity factor, load factor, whatever you call it, is 50 to 60%. No other business can survive with such a load factor. No competitive business can survive below an 80% load factor. This is the only business that does, because it's regulated. We have to rethink regulation, and we have to rethink pricing. So as consumers change their views, as a new generation arrives, new technologies arrive, I believe commissions will begin to listen more attentively to this and not regard this as a red flag. I'm really impressed with this turnout, and I'm sure it'll be written up in the trade press. What New York does, as I said, is listened to by people around the globe. So I'm hoping the Empire State, where the sun rises, is going to live up to its reputation and make some innovations here. So why do we do time-varying pricing? It's very obvious, but for completeness, I'm putting it up here. Economic efficiency and equity are the two drivers, the two E's that lead us to time-varying pricing. I mentioned earlier 50 million households have smart meters, and the number rises every day. Less than 2 million, according to my estimates, and they're changing every day as well, are in time-varying prices. So what does it cost us not to have this? According to estimates I made, these are rough estimates, and it would be hard to prove in a litigated kind of a setting, but they are reasonable back-of-the-envelope estimates. $7 billion a year lost in lower energy costs. In other words, we are paying $7 billion more as a society in the United States, happily with flat rates, not knowing what that is costing us. And $3 billion a year is the cross-subsidy between peaky customers and non-peaky customers that's going on every year. Now, back in 2009, we did a study for the New York ISO that wanted to look at what would happen in a hypothetical scenario. The scenario was what would happen if real-time pricing was to be universally deployed in New York. Okay? It's not mandatory, it's universally deployed. That's a much better term, right? So if it was a thought experiment, a Gedanken experiment as the Germans call it. And we used price elasticities from the state of Illinois because that was the only state where real-time pricing was actually being carried out. They have some 25,000 customers, and you will hear more about that in the next session. So we took the price elasticities from that experiment, from that full-scale deployment, which has about 25,000 customers on it. I believe the number that we used was roughly minus 0.05. So very small number, but not a zero number. In other words, if the prices go up by 100%, usage goes down by 5%. Just using that very conservative small number, which is not technology-enabled. It is just people doing it by manually adjusting their thermostat, turning off the lights, et cetera, et cetera. Just very, very basic. We came up with peak reductions that would be in the range of 10 to 14% in the state of New York. And in New York City, 13 to 16%, and 11 to 14% on Long Island. And what would be the cost reductions that would flow from those? On a total resource cost test basis, a drop of 3 to 6% per year. Now that is a large number. I have debates with people saying 3 to 6% is small, it is single digits. I said multiply that into the millions of dollars every year that form your total resource cost test, it adds up to a large number. Even 1% is very large. 3 to 6 is significant. And this is with no technology-enabled real-time pricing. Okay? Again, a mind experiment. And market-based customer costs would decrease for the customers by 2 to 5%. So we did the paper. It was very exciting. The New York ISO's website has it. I have a link at the end. And I thought we would publish this in the Electricity Journal, just to get the word out. I was told, no, you can't. I said, why not? This is a very sensitive issue. Reminded me of a project I did in Saudi Arabia. I've been going there for work for 20 years. And we did a project looking at time of use rates in Saudi Arabia. What would be the benefits to the kingdom's 25 million residents? And we came up with large numbers. And then I said to the CEO of the electric utility, so it's a slam dunk now, you're going to go ahead with it, I assume. He said, we need to think about it. So I kept pestering him with emails, the usual things that consultants do. And a year later, I said, so I've given up. Are you not doing it? He said, yeah, we're not doing it. I said, how come? All these savings. He said, I cannot go to the board and tell them that I didn't do something that was so obvious for the past 10 years. He just retired. Okay, so what are the issues? There are tons of issues. I will not get into the metering issue. Maybe that can come up during the panels. I will focus instead on the customer side issues and challenges. And in particular on 7 objections or concerns or myths or allegations. Use whatever term you want to. These are the most frequently voiced concerns about why time-varying pricing is bad for customers. Okay. So the first one is customers won't respond to time-varying pricing. Okay. So I took the results of more than 200 studies of individual pricing programs around the globe based on published literature, and several of you in the room are familiar with at least 1 or 2 of those, and some may have been part of more of those. And I rank ordered the results, and the peak reductions range from virtually 0% in some cases to more than 50% in other cases. I thought this was a very convincing chart. Wrong. People said to me, oh, that chart tells me nothing. It says it could be any number. Paul Joskov said that. I'm sure you know him, Professor Paul Joskov. I said, okay, so you're giving me a hard time because you're 10 years older than me, or more. So I said, okay, let me do some homework here. By the way, he's a great guy. And so if you take the results, you find that 60% of them have resulted at 10% or greater. So significant response. Okay? Some tests have low responses. And then if you group them by tariff design, you also get some interesting clusters. So I took the simplest form, which is time of use, and then I put variable peak pricing like the one in Oklahoma. Then I have peak time rebates, which are very popular, and critical peak pricing, which is even more dramatic in terms of its impact. And the message that began to come through was, perhaps the higher the peak price is, the lower the off-peak price has got to be because it has to be revenue neutral. And so the chance for customers to save rises with the peak prices being higher. It sounds like it's counterintuitive because why would you save more with higher prices? Well, the simple reason is because the higher prices are only there for 1 to 5% of the hours. Of the 8,760 hours in the year, most of them are lower priced hours. And the more you raise the price in the few hours that are the critical hours, the more you have to lower it in the other hours. So when consumers shift their energy away from expensive to inexpensive, they save more. The critical peak pricing is the most dramatic version of that, and that's why you get the most demand response. So I thought I was done it with, but then came the second objection. Customer response will not change with price. And that I clearly knew was fallacious, but it required some proof. So what we did was we took the data and we segregated it time of use in one bucket and dynamic pricing in the other bucket. We plotted them out and we fit simple regression lines. And those curves that you see, the arcs of price response, I call them, show that as you dial up the peak to off-peak price ratio, in other words, you lower the off-peak prices and raise the peak prices, you get more response. Consumers are smart. Well, We know that because the newspapers run sales all the time and coupons come in. People shop at Macy's more when prices are lower. They buy more groceries and more gasoline when prices are lower. Why should that be any different for electricity? Well, the answer always has been, well, because it's different. It's a necessity. Okay, then came the third concern. Oh, don't bother with the smart technologies. They're too expensive. Smart thermostats, Nest. Who wants Nest? Well, Google does. They paid $3.2 billion for Nest, right? And at every Home Depot I've been to, there's a Nest sitting there. Is it cheap? No, it's $250. And you have to install it yourself. Most people can, I've figured out, except for me. But even my analysts and associates are telling me, you should be able to do it, but I just have a brand new other thermostat. The reality is people are paying attention. People tell me, oh, who would spend $250 on a thermostat? Their electric bill is only $100 a month. They don't care about saving energy. Well, how come they're buying the Nest thermostat? How come they're buying the smartphones that control the Nest thermostat? So this is called cognitive dissonance. If you listen to Fox News, you know what I mean. Okay, concern number 4. Customer response is an illusion. It's a novelty, it'll wear off. Okay? Like a high school love affair. So customer response has persisted in long-lived pilots. California, Washington, D.C., Oklahoma, running for 2 years, pilots. Okay? Response persisted. Maryland for 4 years. Now you might say, oh, those are all pilots. Reality is different. Yes, I agree, reality is different. You cannot pilot reality. That's a new film coming out after Interstellar, is pilots as reality. I agree with all of that. But if you look at programs that have been in place for decades, in France, the tempo tariff goes back to 1965. It has persisted, or they wouldn't be doing it. The French, if anything, are very analytical. Arizona's time of use rates, the highest penetration in the country with 51%, go back to 1980. It persists. Even in the hot furnace-like environment that Phoenix has, if you can believe it, they have 100 days a year. That's 1/3 roughly, 1/4, depending on how you do the division, above 100 degrees. In that climate, 51% of the customers are on time of use rates. Then comes the ultimate. It's unethical. What do you do? Now there's a serious issue. So in 2011, Mark Toney, who is the head of TURN, a consumer advocacy group in California, debated this topic with me, that it'll hurt low-income customers. And this was at the Kellogg Alumni Club. And if you're into it, there's an 1.5-hour video, pure sadism in action, that you can check out. Okay. And then in 2010, right here across the river in Rutgers, there was a conference on the ethics of dynamic pricing. When I got that invitation, I was stunned. It came from a professor of moral philosophy, Martin Bunzel. I said, Martin, have you guys run out of real ethical issues? like good and evil? Like, does God exist? I mean, you're now into dynamic pricing. It must be really a low point in your career. Well, I went. Bill Hogan was the discussant. And imagine Bill Hogan being my discussant, not the other way around. And then there were 4 commissioners, 4 consumer advocates, and 4 utilities. And it was quite a debate. Did I mention consumer advocates? 4 consumer advocates, one from New Jersey, Barbara Alexander, and 2 others. It was videotaped all 8 hours. And I, last night, wrote to Martin. I said, by the way, do you have a link in case I want to share it? He said, I'll check it. Then he says, the server deleted it. I said, it was that bad? Believe me, there were some incredible moments. Anyway, so 2010, right? Let's keep going back in time. 1971, we had a professor here, William Vickery at Columbia, got the Nobel Prize eventually. Died a few days short of getting the prize, but really a brilliant guy. And he wrote a paper in 1971 in which he said people shared the medieval notion of a just price, okay, and regarded prices that varied with demand-supply imbalances as intrinsically evil. Okay, concern number 6. Customers have never encountered time-varying pricing, as if we just invented it. As I said, while that may be true of the charming TV character, Archie Bunker, he probably had not encountered it. Today's consumers experience time-varying pricing in everyday routine transactions, except when it comes to purchasing electricity. So let me give you a few examples. Airlines, bridge tolls, freeway lanes, groceries, hotels, railroads, rental cars, sporting events, and theaters. Those are the obvious ones that come to mind. They have varying prices based on seasonal and other conditions. They want to improve their load factor. And by the way, even the parking meter has a time of day rate. People don't think about it, but it's free on weekends in many areas. It's free on nights in certain suburban areas. I don't know what the deal is here. Maybe you pay all the time. But in California, we're moving to very smart pricing, even of the parking meters. Technology is there. So much for the statement that customers have never encountered it. And then comes this objection. This is the last one. They don't want it. Okay? After having lost all other 6 battles, comes this one in the Trojan War that's going on. If you look around the globe and you talk to folks who have offered it, ranging from Australia to Canada, to Ireland to Japan, every person who has been on this rate tends to like it. Some don't, right? There's a choice. 10% won't like it, but most people like it. And the allegation has been made by more than one person that I don't want to get up at 2 in the morning to do my laundry. Well, no one else does either, sir. And if you insist, you can do it, but nobody's stopping you, but you're not required to, and you won't save a whole lot just by moving your laundry anyway. So it's your air conditioner, that's what the game is about. But those are the metaphors that have personified this debate. What most customers have found is that they can save money by making small adjustments, 1 to 2 degrees to 3 degree adjustments in the thermostat, rescheduling their laundry instead of doing it whenever they want to, doing it after 9 p.m. They're watching a TV program, just put the laundry there and run it at that time. Avoid the peak period. So as a result of all of these concerns having been laid waste, it is being practiced widely. I mentioned Arizona, I mentioned Illinois. Massachusetts, there is a straw proposal that calls for default critical peak pricing in conjunction with time of use pricing. If customers don't want it, they could opt out to a flat rate and still be eligible to have a peak time rebate. Mid-Atlantic region, Wayne Harbaugh will talk about what's happening there. And PJM, every conversation I've had with them, they are really interested, as they put it, in moving demand response back to the demand side of the market. They want the demand curve to show the elasticity, not the supply curve. Oklahoma, I talked it up. I could say more, but I know there are time limitations. That really is the program to watch if you want to see a successful opt-in program. They have ads running on the major TV channels. That's why the awareness is so high. Okay, Australia, so people tell me, oh, New York is restructured. Texas is restructured. Well, half the country is restructured, and they're still able to find a way to do it. You'll see the Baltimore story very soon. Well, Australia is totally restructured. It's just like the Texas market. Actually, when I went there, I said to them that your market reminds me of the Texas market. And they said, oh, they came here a few years prior and learned what we were doing and just copied it there. I've mentioned this to the ones in Texas. They have it the other way. But in any event, they both have the same scenario. There is no utility that provides retail service. You shop around, and it's just like the UK market. Well, so the distribution companies have this challenge. They have very low load factors. Distribution network pricing is very high in Australia. Their all-in average rate, just to get a number out there, is 34 cents a kilowatt hour. This is not Hawaii I'm talking about. This is Australia. Okay? So they are looking hard at TVP, time varying pricing, to raise load factor and lower rates. And Ausgrid, which is the utility in Sydney, now has 20% of their residential customers on TOU rates just for distribution. In Queensland and Victoria, where you have cities like Brisbane and Melbourne, the distribution networks have done pilots very successfully with time-varying pricing and are planning to move ahead with that. Canada, though, is the biggest, the most dramatic, just north of us, often ignored. The province of Ontario has 4.5 million households and small businesses, and 90% of them are on the regulated default time-of-use pricing plan. Now, admittedly, their pricing plan doesn't have a huge peak to off-peak ratio, but peak is still 50% higher than off-peak. And that has created a reduction in peak demand of 2.5%. Very consistent year 1 and year 2. The third year has just begun. Italy, as you may know, I did mention the ancient Rome inspired view of the bathroom here. So Italy has 29 million households on default time of use pricing. Okay. The problem is the differential is almost not there. And I've been talking with them trying to increase the differential for a while. But I don't know what the issue is. But even that small differential has produced significant savings, and the number that you see there is a small number, but it's still a number to think about. And France, as I said, a couple of decades ago, rolled out this tempo tariff, and a third of their customers are on that tariff. In Asia, in Japan, in Hong Kong, we're seeing a lot of interest in time of use pricing. China as well. China has not published any results, otherwise I would cite them. Let me talk briefly about Ontario. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just show you their time of use rate and the periods that are there. So they have 3 periods: on peak, which is brown, 14 cents, mid-peak, which is 11.4, and 7.7, which is the off-peak. These are the prices they have. They apply only to the commodity portion of the rate. The T&D doesn't vary by time of day. And we also recommended changes to them, and they're considering those, the Ontario Energy Board. But this is the rate that's currently there. And these are the reductions in peak demand that have been observed in these 3 different time periods. So if you look just at the very right, which is the province as a whole, you're seeing reductions in excess of 2%. So that brings us, I think, to the last big issue here, and I hope you're writing down your questions. Should time of use rates be rolled out as the default tariff, or should they be opt-in? Canada went with default, Italy went with default. They have retail choice. The customer can pick a retailer and pick the tariff they are providing. So what you have is the enrollment rates differ quite a bit. If you do the opt-in, then time of use becomes a choice. They have to actively exercise their right to choose it. And the best you're going to get is 53%, which is Arizona Public Service. And there are special circumstances there that I can talk about later on as to why the number is so high. I think you're going to get a number under 20%. And you're probably going to get a number more like 5 to 10%. And in many utilities, but by the way, every utility in the US has a time of use rate for residential customers. I don't know of anyone that doesn't. And usually the number of customers they have are fewer than the fingers on 2 hands. It's there as a formality. They don't market it, nobody's aware of it. Where they do push and do a good job, they will typically get 1% or better. Now, if I was getting 1% in my class, I don't know where I would be. But they're very happy with the 1%. I don't know why. So if you do default, then you're going to get much larger numbers. And the numbers we have seen are closer to 80%. Okay. And so where does that leave us? Well, I had an article in the Fortnightly a few issues back, I think it was last August, which is referenced at the end, where I showed that if you do opt in, then you're going to get more impact per participating customer because they're actively engaged, but you have very few of those. And if you do opt out, you still have those, and then you have many others who will do something. And so the numbers add up. It's a numbers game. So if you want a bigger impact, and this example is twice as large, then default is the way to go. But I respect the views of others who say, no, we want to have choice. Well, default is not mandatory. And my friend Steve George has pointed it out on several occasions. But people in their mind immediately equate default with mandatory. There's still a choice. You just have to opt out. It's not like a speed limit where it is mandatory, and we know how much that's respected. But default has a lot of choices. Okay? With speed limit, you can't opt out. Now, no one said that change would be easy, right? Nothing is easy to change. And I had to go back further in time to 1939 to pull this out. British economist Bolton, he wrote a textbook on engineering economics. This was in my dad's collection. My dad was a power engineer. And believe me, it was not my intention to go down that area, but I ended up becoming a power economist. You know how that happens. So this guy's name was Bolton. And he wrote that changes in tariffs were guaranteed to be an unfailing source of argumentation. And this is a direct quote: there is general agreement that appropriate tariffs are essential to any rapid development of electricity supply. And there is complete disagreement as to what constitutes an appropriate tariff. So it's like a Zen-like situation. You know? They call it a koan, K-O-A-N. So there are ways to ease the pain and to make the transition almost painless. There will be winners and losers, and so the key to success is gradualism. By gradualism, I don't mean 35 years. I mean something like 3 to 5 years. Okay? So choices should be offered. And one of those choices definitely should be the historically loved and beloved, I should say, flat rate. But it should be a fully hedged flat rate. It should not be an average hedge. It has an insurance premium built into it. It ignores all the price volatility. So that should always be there. And it cannot be equal to the flat rate we have today. It has to be higher than that. Other options with the dynamic prices could include bill protection. You could have 100% bill protection, and then you phase it out. Most people phase it out in just 1 year. I think that's too short. I think it should be 3 to 5 year window in which you phase it out. So 100%, then 80%, then 60%. You know, gradually, it's like training wheels. They'll figure it out how to deal with it. If they still don't like it, they can opt out of it. So the opt-out is always there. But you're training them, you're getting them used to the idea. I think we were chatting earlier that many people would benefit by just going to this rate without changing anything. 50% in a revenue-neutral rate design would benefit instantly. They're called instant winners. They're also called structural winners. There are all kinds of terms for those. And some people even call them free riders, which I think is inappropriate. But you know who I'm referring to, the people who are more off-peak intensive. Well, they will benefit, but they don't. They don't take it. Typically, only 1 or 2% of them take it because fear and lack of time to think about it is the challenge. So you can address the first one by putting this bill protection for an extended period of time. And you can address the second one by marketing and creating awareness. You know, you have to use the Rotary Club. You cannot just do bill inserts. Most people don't even get a bill anymore. They have automated bill payment. And even those who do, they just toss it out. So direct mail, traditional style, it just doesn't work. Do what Oklahoma is doing. I don't fully know what they're doing, but I'm really impressed with the outcome, and I'll have to go back to learn a bit more. So bill protection, you could also do what the Australians suggested. It hasn't yet been approved by the government. They've had some political confusion there, and the government is very scared of doing anything interesting, the new one. What they proposed, the commission there, AEMC they're called, was exclude the vulnerable customers. And I have another idea, which is to do energy stamps. They would be like food stamps. Okay? Just create energy stamps and let the assembly deal with that. Or do two-part rates, and you know, if there's time, you'll get into it. So coming to New York, this is, I believe, my last slide. I got the hand wave. What are the challenges to implementing time-varying pricing in New York? The first one is lack of smart meters. And I think with time, that problem will be resolved. Nobody will be making the old meters anymore. At some point, they'll have to be replaced, and they will be smart meters at that point. Hopefully, it'll happen sooner than when these ones die out, but that's the biggest barrier that's mentioned. Second is there's a restructured marketplace here. Yes, I know, but it is being done very successfully in many other restructured markets. Even Texas is now doing it. Australia is doing it. Baltimore is doing it. Pepco is doing it. Okay, then comes this issue, there's the Manhattan skyline, dominated by apartments, by renters, and room air conditioners. That's true, yes. But Hong Kong, very similar in structure, has very successfully tested a pilot with peak time rebates. It can be done. And as you know, there are new technologies now that control individual room air conditioners. Think Eco is one of the companies that is putting it out, and I believe they were tested here in New York City. And then there is this law that keeps coming up, which says that it's illegal. So I have looked into it. Yeah, it's illegal to do mandatory, but you could always do opt-in, and you could do default. And maybe one day the law will change. Okay. So there's a ton of source material that's here at the end, which you could look at your leisure. And why don't I stop with this slide? Thank you. Would you like to?
Do you want to keep sitting or stand, or do you want to sit?
I'll just hand it back. So thank you very much for that terrific presentation. My name is Elizabeth Stein, and I don't have a placard, but I'm an attorney at Environmental Defense Fund. And we received a lot of fantastic questions, and we have limited time, so I'm only going to ask you 2 or 3 of them. Audrey Zibelman spoke of the important role for service aggregators. And she was talking about demand response markets, possibly, I think, as an alternative to directly showing real-time pricing. How do you see time variant prices as applying with respect to aggregators and third parties, and the relative virtues of showing the prices directly to customers versus demand response markets?
There are several ways to do that. One could simply be that there are dynamic rates, whether it's time of use or critical peak pricing or real-time pricing, let's just call them time-varying rates. Those could be prices that are visible to the consumers in the marketplace, and then those consumers who don't know how to respond to those might say, well, this aggregator has a program where they will help me cope with the prices, so they could just sign up with the aggregator. It'll make their life simpler. So, companies like X, Y, or Z, Verge, and Knox, all of those companies out there, they could become the customer's allies and help them deal with it. Another option could be that the retailers might themselves begin to offer those pricing options to consumers. The utilities might have a default rate that's flat, and then the retailers could offer those, and the customers could pick those rates. That's kind of like the Texas model, in which the retailers are offering the prices, and the utilities actually have no commodity pricing at all. Or you could look at the Australian case, where even for the distribution portion of the bill, the T&D portion, which could be as much as, in some cases, 40 to 50% of the total bill, that could be made time varying. So the utilities could play a role in having a time-varying distribution rate, and the retailers could offer. So there are various ways in which it could be done. But the key to success is to have wholesale prices express that volatility. Otherwise, if that price itself doesn't vary much, then there's not going to be much action.
Thanks. Do you see carbon emission reductions effect from time-variant pricing, and how?
Not necessarily. Carbon emissions are best obtained through energy efficiency programs and changes in the fuel mix of the generation units. Most of what we're talking about with time-varying pricing is a change in the load profile. So unless there's a huge differential between emissions during the peak hours versus emissions during the off-peak hours, you're not going to see a humongous amount of change. In general, we have not seen conservation occurring with time-varying rates. That has to be a separate avenue that has to be pursued through other programs.
If time-varying prices save overall costs, why must they be revenue neutral?
They're revenue neutral to begin with because of concerns about recovering the fixed cost of the utility as it currently exists. Then as they lower the cost over the long haul, then that postpones the need for building new capacity. So rates do come down eventually. The result is not revenue neutral, but the starting point, for reasons of fairness to the utility, it has to be revenue neutral.
And one more that I think is very relevant in the New York context. Co-ops and condos and co-ops that use submetering are responsible to purchase submeters. How can you incentivize them to switch to smart meters that allow time-variant pricing? And I think there's a more general question embedded in them of what would a time-variant pricing regime look like in submetered context?
I thought that was illegal. If it isn't, it should be. California certainly doesn't allow it. If it's there, then I guess the message has to be an informational message from the owner of the building to the occupants that if we participate in this program, then eventually you will have a lower bill. But it certainly becomes much harder to get that message across because people will be suspicious of the landlord and think that the landlord will keep the savings. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge.
I think we're out of time, so
Okay.
thank you very much.